Good evening. I want to make a response to Sargon's video from the other day about the gender pay gap. And I want to make it because I had kind of a similar experience, or I had an experience that's related to it. I had to read this book. Well, I didn't have to, but I did, because this book informs a graphic that is coming up in a work-related situation I'm going to be in, and I needed to unpack it for myself, so I read the book a couple of times. And I determined that it was written through a social constructionist lens, which is not surprising. And despite being about gender, it except for when absolutely necessary, denied any innate human characteristics and minimized biology as much as possible, and attempted to diminish sex difference down to rather superficial things, and also reproductive capacity, but somehow managed to discount reproductive capacity as much as they could as well. And also it overemphasized the tiny minority of people who are born intersex as somehow proof of their theory. Anyway, it was a confusing mess on the biological level. So this is the same lens mentioned by Sargon as to how the gender pay gap was upheld as true in the article about the older Hawaiian women. I noticed that he used this book, which is one I use a lot, but I generally use it to show how there are different moral systems. Different people have different moral systems, and those moral systems run deep and, of course, have a genetic and biological basis. Sargon is using this book because there's one particular example in there that is very descriptive of the combination of human biology and the environment on how people turn out, and that's the rough draft analogy, which is great. It's, you come out as a rough draft and then your environment completes the book. So could you characterize completing the book as social construction? I mean, in terms of social behavior. That's an interesting question. You could say certain jobs, for example, filling specific needs at specific times in history and across time, are social constructions, but not overall gender roles, which are innate, as exemplified by the Norwegian film, and whose origin is clearly laid out by Simon Baron-Cohen, who, by the way, is only motivated by his field of study, not by politics. He's one of the leading, if not the leading, autism researcher in the world. Human behavior is more like the unfinished draft, grounded in biology but dressed by culture. So you could say you come out of the womb wearing a slip, or you come out naked and then society dresses you up. It's something like that. There are certain social constructions. One of them is money. And this is constructed as a symbolic substitute for barter or trade, which is a biologically based human universal. Speaking of human universals, I want to tell you about this book, which you probably already know about. I'm reading it now, and there are two things that come up in that book so far for me. I'm not very far into it. One of them is that twins separated at birth are often very much alike despite being raised apart. When they meet each other as adults, they discover that personality and behavioral traits they share are almost uncanny, sometimes down to specific habits. The second is this chart in the back of human universals, things that have discovered to be universal across culture. And in terms of barter, which I just mentioned, there's also reciprocal exchanges of labor, goods, and services, or trade. So money is a symbol of these two things, I guess you could say. So you will notice, you will notice that sex, gender terminology is fundamentally binary. So characterizing sex as binary is also human universal. And this comes up in the Norwegian film. The American researcher says that in the 50 plus countries he's surveyed, a binary characterization of sex is universal. I know a lot has been said on this, but I think the way that these postmodern social constructionist theories persist, since they can't be upheld by scientific evidence, is exactly what Haidt's main complaint is, and which is why he founded the Heterodox Academy, because faculties in universities are heavily weighted on the side of postmodernism and social constructionism, especially in the humanities and social sciences. And I have been told recently that this is infiltrating STEM as well. Anyway, these professors absolutely either believe or insist that this lens is in fact not distorted. And either unconsciously, either through unconscious or actual conspiracy, they keep this theory alive as the truth. And they insist that, they persist in the notion that oppression of marginalized people by the patriarchy, or oppressed by the oppressor, is the prime way that society functions. And the paper that Sargon mentioned, the framework of that paper, is absolutely how that kind of research is presented. First, you name a victim. Then you demonstrate how the victim has been victimized by a perpetrator. You imply or name the perpetrator, and then you suggest an intervention of some sort, or you suggest that research should be done to solve this social problem. Postmodernism was certainly alive and well when I was in art school in the 80s. The way it touched me, of course, was through the destruction of art, and I'll show you an example here. And also through art criticism. We used to make an awful lot of fun of the bullshit that art criticism with postmodern language is. I mean, it's hilarious and it's impenetrable. You have no idea what they're talking about. So we made a lot of jokes around that back in the day. But the real concern, of course, is that social policy is informed by academia, and worse, that the left as a whole has embraced the social constructionist lens. And I think an obvious example is Justin Trudeau's people kind remark, but there are many examples of this, as to how this ideology has infiltrated the upper echelons of Western government through North America and in Europe. Also, remember that this book is informing, this social constructionist view is informing a graphic about gender that is widely distributed. So yes, what Sargon is saying is absolutely true and mirrors exactly what I found. That if an assessment of a problem in the domain of society or culture, such as the gender pay gap, is viewed through a theory that rests on at best a half-truth and at worst a falsehood, or a theory that does not align with the way people actually are, then the way this problem is viewed through this lens will be distorted. Like Sargon so eloquently put it, any work done from this perspective will contain the flaws inherent in the theory. So let's go back to this book. The flaw that is manifested here in this book is pages and pages of different ways to characterize supposed different types of gender. Because if sex is constructed, then it's not binary. It's You can definitely have more than 2 sexes. You can have 4, or you can have 20, or you can have 200. And that's certainly what the glossary indicates, but in practical application, this is what you would characterize as unsustainable. It does not line up with how people are. It does not line up with how people are, both in what works for society and what naturally emerges across time and culture. Now, I want to say one last thing about transgender. So I do think that there's an argument to be made for a third sex. It's not in the universals, but transgenderism does have a biological basis, it seems. There seems to be quite a lot of research that indicates that. So I would not put actual biologically based transgenderism in the area of social construction. It isn't, and it has nothing to do with this, really. So that's not something I have any problem with. I have a problem with these other numerous names for so-called genders. So anyway, I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.